The early morning sunlight shone through the overhead foliage, casting soft shadows across the open field. The gentle breeze and the cool morning air evoked memories reminiscent of summer days from childhood, days filled with quiet, idle hours of playful meanderings and endless lazy daydreams. The temperature was rising steadily and was hovering around 100 as the day was starting to break. I was teetering dangerously close to dozing off as I lay in a prone position just inside the tree line. First squad of Charlie Company, of which I was slack or second in line, stared out at the clearing, uncertain about crossing into the open and onto the adjoining ridge. The entire area was filled with landmines, strategically placed by an unseen and cunning adversary. The five of us were on edge. An hour earlier, two members of Second Squad had fallen victim. Machine gunner Fino tripped a wire that detonated behind him, taking the hand and arm, and the M79 grenade launcher that they contained, belonging to Ronald Wilkerson. Rufino's forward motion sent him face first into a pungy stake trap. It was doubtful that he felt any lingering pain, or if his mind even registered what it had in an instant taken his life. This deceivingly peaceful-looking open area stood between us and our objective. The squad's orders were to secure the far ridge and set up a perimeter, the highest point from which we could maintain surveillance. Although this strategy seemed pointless, given that the mountain sign was completely hollowed out with tunnels, it was our only immediate defense against an elusive and diligent enemy. As if by telepathy, we all rose in unison. Squad leader Rick Thompson on point and me at slack. Dixon, our own M60 machine gunner, at center, and Gideon and Contrico pulling up the rear. I watched Rick move out. Counting off to 10 in my head, I followed his movements while keeping the back of his helmet in view. Then I crossed into the sunlight. Midway across the expanse, I watched as he faltered and nearly lost his balance. He dropped down at least a foot before he was able to right himself and continue to the opposite tree line. Had to have been some kind of shaft or outlet, he whispered, as he lay in the shadow of cover. Not wide enough to fall into. I guess I lucked out. I barely heard him, but it was enough to understand what he had said. Yeah, you did. My words coming slow, my breathing labored, as I too was about to enter the shadowed shelter. But we had both made it to the other side. I turned to see Dixon cross into shadow and then enter the enclosure. 2 to go. Gideon was about halfway, completely exposed and helpless. 10 seconds later, he crashed through the line, out of breath but unscathed. Contrico to go. The four of us waited and watched. The sun beat down on the open field, the heat moving in waves and shimmers across the expanse. The air so thick that any vision seemed merely an apparition, an impossibility. And rising from the silent commotion like a long-lost figure in a nearly forgotten dream was the tip of an M16 firearm, followed by Contrico's camouflaged helmet and his horrified and desperate face. Eyes wide open, mouth agape, he stumbled into the shelter of the shadows and crashed to the forest floor. We five were as one again. We had made it across. This time.
No, I'm not the night manager of some catacomb, and I'm not one of those caped ghouls haunting a dark and dreary cemetery. I didn't plan on keeping company with the departed. It just happened. Not in one fell swoop, mind you, but gradually, after I'd been busy in the ugly war of attrition that confronts vets when we finally stuff our uniforms in a sea bag and become civilians. When I was no longer a raw recruit in the corporate world, that's when they started dropping in on me, unannounced. Surprise visits in the wee small hours of the night, or at the office, even during a client meeting. My mind would see them, hear voices sounding like theirs of long ago. In those days when we were physically close and snoring and groaning, sleeping in a barrack squad bay, existing day and night, I didn't think that such togetherness would go on forever. The thought never occurred to me that guys like Manzi and Bertolozzi, or later in various pilots' ready rooms and sweaty hooches, that the likes of Lammers, Emerson, Hale, Trombo, Renaud, Harrell, Himmler, Fleming, Glover, who, in spite of their dreams and expectations similar to my own, were living on borrowed time. But I never heard of this moving in on a surviving comrade and taking up permanent residence. It was news to me. It wasn't part of the traditionally accepted or official government issue war experience. It never happened in movies to John Wayne or Randolph Scott or even Van Johnson. And not in literature either. Such behavior isn't mentioned in Catch-22 or All Quiet on the Western Front or even The Red Badge of Courage. I would have expected the fallen to stay put. Was I losing it? Was it shrink time? Did I need a major mental makeover? But to what effect? To slam the gate and bolt the door and lock those guys out? Men who had meant so much to me, many of them who, at one time or another, I owed my life to. Not a chance. Knowing them, they'd never forgive me. They wouldn't stand for it. More than that, I knew that in the civilian world, my plight was atypical. Most veterans don't even know a combat veteran, let alone, tragically, one who didn't come home. If I didn't open my arms to the old gang, who would? Where could they gather? Where could they hang out and tell their war stories? Where could they gather to complain and exchange tricks of their trade, that gold mine of painfully earned wisdom? In lieu of an impossibly adequate apology and compensation for their loss, it's the least I could do. Then others joined, from other wars, a gunnery sergeant from my son's recon unit, known to be the best Marine that God ever made. Then another from World War II. In my mother's effects, I found a love letter from an admirer, a Marine lieutenant who wrote, "I think the Marine Corps is wonderful. I guess I'll never lose the urge for excitement. I only wish I were in aviation. Then my world would be all roses." As a major, he'd taken over the famed squadron of America's all-time leading ace, Major Joe Foss, and died flying a F-4F Wildcat somewhere in the Pacific. But I'm not complaining. I've actually come to enjoy the company of each one of the gang. Their laughter, their sarcasm, and their irreverence, genuine heroes and great Americans all. And truth be told, not that you haven't already guessed, I'm not so sure they're really dead. And that uncertainty is what keeps us going, come hell or high water, always faithful and, yes, still together.
I received an email from my friend Rod, a veteran who had been a helicopter pilot in Vietnam. He was asking if I had any recollection of a Marine operation that turned out badly in May of 1967. He had received several emails from members of his helicopter reunion group, Popasmoke.com. The forwarded messages painted a grim picture of a Vietnam battlefield strewn with dead and wounded Marines after the position was overrun by North Vietnamese troops. The helicopter units had the grim task of removing over 100 bodies to Graves registration and flying a large number of wounded Marines to medical facilities, including the Repose, my hospital ship. I immediately thought of a day in the spring of 1967 when the morning calm was shattered by a call for flight quarters, requesting all personnel to prepare for receiving 96 emergency medevacs. The number was way beyond anything that the Repose had handled before. I wondered if the message was a mistake. The entire ship's company scanned the skies and quickly noticed a large string of helicopters approaching from the southwest and rapidly closing on our ship. Calls continued, ordering medical personnel to the triage area and litter bearers to the flight deck. A boatload of divers was lowered into the water, preparing for any possible crash at sea. The fire suppression team was ready next to the flight deck. The first UH-34 was already circling to land. The feeling of the Repose crew was one of excitement and dread. We had a limited number of operating rooms, a limited number of surgeons, and a very limited number of anesthesia doctors. Wounded combatants had to be treated as expeditiously as possible if they were going to survive. Would this be the time that we would not be able to save all of our Marines? I felt like the clock was ticking. We all knew what had to be done. The wounded were carried into triage for evaluation one at a time by members of the surgical team. Vital signs were recorded, and injuries were documented and their severity noted. Then each patient was presented to Dr. Snyder, the chief of surgery, and our triage officer. It was his task to decide the order for care of each Marine and to assign surgical teams. Patients with vascular injuries, active bleeding, or penetrating abdominal injuries were given first priority. Minor injuries and intracranial head wounds were given lower priorities. Somehow the triage officer was able to prioritize all 96. By the time the process was completed, the first patients were already in surgery, having their injuries addressed. I finished examining my last patient and turned to Dr. Snyder for my next assignment. The doctor sternly gave me the order to sleep for 4 hours and then report to OR number 2 to begin operating. It was not easy to sleep with all the excitement, but I knew that it was important to have enough fresh surgeons to complete our task. Under Dr. Snyder's direction, the operating rooms were kept busy around the clock for 3 days. He acted as a ringmaster, using his crew as efficiently as possible. I can't recall how many surgeries that I performed or assisted in. The entire staff was kept occupied. It was hardest on the anesthesia staff because they were only 3, and there were 3 operating rooms that they had to service. They did take turns getting some sleep so that they could function safely. With limited ORs, turning the rooms over quickly was a priority. Everyone did everything possible to move things along smoothly. I witnessed Commander Larry Glass on more than one occasion mopping the operating room deck to save a few minutes. The corpsmen who were scrub techs had taken to sleeping in the ORs rather than returning to their bunks. It happened that I was the last surgeon to finish on day 3. Patient number 96 was a Marine who had sustained a gunshot wound to his big toe. He had the tip of his toe amputated, but didn't require anything else. His wound healed without infection, despite the long delay in treatment. It is my recollection that all 96 patients survived. I relayed that information to Rod, and he sent the news on to his Popasmoke friends. While we were in Vietnam, it was difficult to get follow-up information on operations that we were involved in. It struck me that this might be the first time, after 53 years, that these pilots would have heard that their difficult and dangerous medevac has saved the lives of a number of Marines.
When I heard excuses for avoiding the draft, was I a fool for not taking that step, or did I genuinely want to fight communism? When I joined the military with the promise of armor OCS, I was attracted to big firepower protections, or was I personally weak? When I graduated from OCS, I skipped the commission ceremony. Could I not wait to start my leave at home, or did I need to escape the military? When I met my new black company commander, would my white privileged life get in the way, or would he become a comrade? When I defended in a court-martial a serviceman who was convicted, was it my unpreparedness, or was I afraid to challenge the presiding officer's ruling? When I jumped off a zip-line tower, crossing a river at the Army's jungle school, was I overcoming a fear of heights, or was I too afraid to look afraid? When I prayed for a quick, painless death, had I lost hope, or was I capable of facing my mortality? A madam offered me free putang if I allowed her girls to work my platoon. Was my rejection because of a wedding vows, or a fear of enemy infiltration? When I interrupted a sapper attack on F Troop and led the counterattack, was it my military training or abject terror causing me to react? When I resented being awarded the Bronze Star, did I hate being singled out from others, or could I bear the moniker of hero? Arriving in Hawaii on R&R with a cattle truck taking us to our families, did I resent meeting my wife in a warehouse, or was I shocked by crowds? When I dreaded leaving Cambodia, returning to the raging war in Vietnam, was it because of Cambodia's relative calm, or the smell of death in Vietnam? When I received compensation for wounds suffered in combat, did I feel the compensation was earned, or had I gamed the system? Arriving in San Francisco from Vietnam, a hippie hocked a loogie at me. Did I rush past him to make my flight home, or did I believe his taunts? When not asked about my Vietnam experiences, did they not care enough, or did I care too much? When I feel compelled to share my military experiences, are my experiences relevant to anyone, or is it my plea for importance? When I heard the job recruiter say I wasted time in the military, was I a follower without a spine, or was I not able to explain my worth? When I feel emotion watching a soldier welcomed home, do I see a joyful family reunion, or am I saddened by their separation? Tearing up seeing military parades or hearing the Army goes rolling along, is it because of true patriotism, or is it simply a reaction to pageantry? Watching the decades-late ticker tape parade in New York for Vietnam vets, did I enjoy the final homecoming, or did I resent not being invited to march? My military experiences are especially important to me later in life. Were they seminal experiences, or do they resurrect feelings of my youth? When someone says to me, "Thank you for your service," am I grateful to be recognized, or does it make me feel like a fraud?
The captain's voice boomed over the speaker system. "Welcome back to the Big Island," and the cabin erupted in cheers. In the taxi from McCord Air Force Base to Seattle-Tacoma Airport, our heads swiveled nonstop, side to side, absorbing everything in sight as if it was all strange and new. Ranch homes, split levels, Victorians, bungalows, shiny new cars, unimaginable wealth in the places we'd left. The terminal was packed with GIs going home, crowding tables, filling the time with beer while waiting to board. Flying east, the sun set for the second time that day, June 22nd, 1968, the longest day of my life. The family met me at JFK Airport. My wife and parents, my sister and cousins, even the family dog was there. Shouts and hugs, my mother tightly clinging, not wanting to let go. On the way home, I held my wife's hand in the back seat of the darkened car and silently cried. I had made it. I was alive. We were at my parents' house, the place where I grew up, just long enough for me to change into civilian clothes and head out to a friend's party. The living room was crowded with people I'd known for years. I don't recall who first asked, "What was Vietnam really like?" When my response, "I was in Korea," didn't meet expectations, the awkward moment passed as if it had never been, and the person moved on. A drink in my hand, conversation swirled around me, voices loud, music thumping. I couldn't concentrate. Talk was about work, a world I didn't know, I didn't belong. One day earlier, the battalion was dug into the berm overlooking an expanse of rice paddy. Every so often, my driver stopped the Jeep atop the wide dike so I could get out and spend a few moments saying goodbye to the platoon leaders. I felt strange. I was leaving the country in the morning while they were thinking about what they had to do should the North Koreans they had been asked to intercept suddenly appear in their fields of fire. But this was something I felt compelled to do on my last full day. In the past several months, as the officer in charge of the Battalion Operations Center, I had planned ambush patrols and sent them into the demilitarized zone, sometimes walking in with them, returning with the patrol being relieved. While they were in the zone, I had maintained radio contact under sometimes perilous circumstances. They were my friends, and I owed it to them to say goodbye. That final night, I would be feted in a traditional sit-down dinner at the Officers Club by the battalion executive officer and the rest of the staff who, without combat roles, had been left behind. The fact that there were few who would attend what was supposed to be a tribute to me was not bothersome because in my mind, I was already gone. I had 30 days leave before my next posting in Niagara Falls, New York. I couldn't relax and convinced my wife to visit the area, some 400 miles distant, where we spent a few days driving around. Back home, I was adrift and disoriented. I didn't know how to explain it. She didn't argue when I decided to cut my leave short. The U.S. Army Support Center was a small installation that had approximately 50 military personnel who worked in a 3-story building that looked like it belonged in an office park. In an adjoining hangar designated as the Nuclear Warhead Maintenance Shop, in which no military personnel would ever set foot, approximately 150 civilians who serviced the Nike missiles surrounding the Buffalo area were employed. I was welcomed by the post commander who informed me I would serve as the public information officer. I would report to the personnel officer, a major who oversaw the roster of officers she would dispatch to notify next of kin when a loved one was killed. Mine would be a 9-to-5 job, and I would have a civilian secretary. Summer dress uniform was the uniform of the day that I would be wearing to the office. I was assigned additional duties as the post representative to the Board of Governors of the Officers Club at the Niagara Falls Air Force Base and the Niagara Falls Chamber of Commerce. When the time came, the post commander introduced me to the city's VIPs by drawing attention to my Purple Heart, which put me in the usual quandary of explaining when asked that I hadn't been to Vietnam. My wife and I were quartered in a ranch house on the Air Force Base. We became friends with the other junior officers, some of whom would soon leave for Vietnam. The post commander encouraged his officers to play golf one afternoon each week. The football season began, and I was assigned as player coach of the post team. I was informed that I should anticipate the same responsibility with the basketball team when the sports season moved indoors. U.S. casualties in Vietnam were averaging more than 1,000 each month, but I was ensconced in a familiar bubble, which was where I wanted to stay. The sedan stopped. I confirmed the address. I reread the dreaded words in the telegram. I buttoned my uniform jacket. I put on my hat and stepped out. I walked to the door. I rang the bell. I waited. The door opened. The bubble burst.
I've been going up to my grandfather's farm in upstate New York almost every summer while in school, and I loved it there. A totally different lifestyle from where I lived in the city of Yonkers. I often dreamed of becoming a farmer. That's what I wanted to do as a young man. At the farm, the people were so different, so much down to earth and comfortable to be with. The freedom of the open space, working the land, and being in touch with nature had a vast appeal to me. However, as I got older, reality set in. Although I was welcomed by them to move there, I knew I couldn't make a decent living as a farmer. I didn't have a farm and would have to work as a farmhand. This was a rural area, and business opportunities were severely lacking. I closed the door to that opportunity. I went into the business world downstate, but whenever I could get away, it was up to the farm. It was in my blood, and I was always welcome when I came. Years later, I moved and bought a house in Yorktown Heights, literally around the corner from a farm, Hilltop Hanover Farm, which is now owned by the county, and it's a shell of what it really used to be. I remember going to a tag sale once, and they had an old farm tractor sitting in the garage. Tires were flat, it was covered with dust and cobwebs, paint peeling, and it hadn't been run in years. I felt they were asking too much money for it, and I told the owners if no one else wanted it, I would buy it for a fraction of what they were offering. Lo and behold, I got a call the next day. It was mine. My wife thought I was crazy. That didn't faze me. I knew someone who could tow it and get it running, which took several weeks. I'd visit their shop often, just anxious to see it and relive my youth. I researched the make and model and found out that it was an old Farmwall tractor, close to 50 years old. Finally, the day came. It looked magnificent in my mind's eye, cleaned up with big new tires. As they drove it off the flatbed, it stalled. It turned out there was rust in the gas tank and it clogged the fuel system. We pushed it to my garage. My heart was in my stomach with disappointment. Within a few days, though, with the help of some friends, we removed the gas tank, cleaned it out thoroughly, and it was ready. As I started it up, the engine came to life, and smoke poured out of the tall exhaust pipe, with the little lid on the top chattering away. I put it in gear, and away I went, slowly at first. I was amazed at how I could drive it at a walk. I increased the speed and drove it down to the country farm road where I lived, to the farm. I opened the farm gate on the road, which led into it, and drove into the fields down where they had a big garden area where they grew crops for the public to purchase. The garden was fenced off, and I was driving slowly beside it, feeling ecstatic with my purchase and the fun and excitement of reliving my past. Of a sudden, the area around the fence became narrower and narrower until I couldn't go any further. I still wasn't used to all the controls. There was a very steep embankment to my right where the fence narrowed it. It dropped about 20 feet and was close to a 45-degree angle. I'd tip over if I continued. Oh shit, I said to myself. I recalled at the farm hearing stories about farmers who were killed when their tractors overturned. I don't know why I didn't think to stop and just back out, but it was all happening so fast. I don't know why, but I made a quick decision and quickly turned right, facing the tractor down the embankment. I was beginning to panic as I put the tractor in neutral. Close to 2,000 pounds of steel started to hurl down that hill out of control, with me on it. I was on the verge of jumping off, but stayed on to steer. I stopped it by steering the back of it into an embankment, slamming into it. Thank God I was holding tightly on the steering wheel, or I would have been catapulted off. And then I realized it stalled because I was low on gas, and the engine was gravity fed. With a steep incline, it just wasn't getting any gas. There was no one around, so I walked home. It wasn't that far. Got gas and started it up again with a hand crank. The tractor was leaning precariously at an angle, and I inched it back on the road and drove it home. Another lesson learned. Since that time, I enjoyed driving it in the neighborhood and getting high fives from all the neighbors and passerbyers. I joined the local Grange Fair, which is down the road from me, with other fellows with the same interests and their own tractors. We have a tractor parade from town, leading to the opening of the annual Grange Fair, then display our tractors and give hay rides. I've relived my dreams.
I drifted back to an idyllic time, the 1960s. The rest of the world was caught up in war and drugs and free love and absolute chaos. I'd escaped the bedlam of home via my displacement in all places, the Republic of South Vietnam. I'd been out of the country for 3 years, having been stationed in the Far East. My last tour of duty was Vietnam, and my time of innocence had come to an end. No more endless summers, the upbeat vibrations of the Beach Boys, the new British invasion sounds of the Beatles, and those happy days. Yes, I was safe, as strange as that might sound, in a war zone. I was not fighting for a nation. I was fighting for survival. From my vantage point, the States were a scarier and bloodier war zone after hearing about King and RFK's assassinations, riots and death in the streets of America, Kent State, and the return of Tricky Dick. Trying to make sense of it now was as futile as it was back then. Now she, on the other hand, was caught up in glamour. She had graduated from business school and had landed her dream job on Madison Avenue. She was working for Condé Nast Publications. Perhaps she was living a Barbie dream world of existence. The rest of the country, though, was absorbed in free love, and she, on the other hand, was experiencing the high price of love. Love from the pages of Vogue and Glamour and Mademoiselle and her favorite, Brides magazine. She, too, was trying to make sense of a world gone mad. Now, I had been listening to Armed Forces radio in the summer of 1969 while stationed at Da Nang Air Base in South Vietnam. The sounds on the station were a reminder of all that was good and wholesome about home. Now, it was the custom of the radio DJs to break things up by reading letters on the air. The DJ shared a letter from a bunch of girls from an all-girls Catholic high school in Brooklyn, New York. They had started a letter-writing club with the intent of boosting troop morale. I quickly jotted down the forwarding address and then thought of all of the possibilities. After all, Brooklyn was just a short drive from my own hometown. My reply, though, had to be clever. No woe is me sitting here in this hellhole. So I started to write, "Dear sweet young thing." Now, writing to some sweet young thing 18,000 miles away, it would keep me busy. It would beat humping bombs and ducking for cover during rocket attacks and counting down the days that I had left in country. I still had a considerable number of days and hours, so I really couldn't call myself a short timer. But perhaps my writing to a few sweet young things would help pass the time. Rest and relaxation, R&R in Australia, would help lob off a few more days too. I would start my short-timer calendar the month before my estimated time of departure. Until then, writing letters might be the game to play and to fill the void. I tried to imagine who might end up with the letter. Perhaps, though, it was a mistake. Would I even get a reply? Now, how she had ended up with the letter has always puzzled me. The letter had gone over well with the high school girls' writing club. I was told that a few of the girls argued about who would write back. Now, after a considerable debate, the club's president, under the advice of Mother Superior, decided that its content was just too clever and too racy for any Catholic high school girl. And she placed the letter in the club's correspondence file under lock and key. How her sister had gotten her hands on it and snuck it home weeks later is still a mystery. Now, my wife saved every letter that she and I wrote, and she recently reminded me a few years ago on a Sunday morning, as we laid in bed, that we should read them to each other. We both laughed about the horrible spelling, the silly romantic innocence, and my attempt to woo her thousands of miles away from the States. My writing skills did not win her over, though. Instead, it was the ability to wire a dozen red roses several times from the Far East with a simple note, "Your secret admirer from afar." She was writing to 3 other servicemen as part of the Support the Troops campaign. Sending roses, though, helped add fuel to the fire when I returned from Vietnam and showed up at her front door with a dozen red roses, putting the riddle of the secret admirer to rest. The letters are now tucked away in the attic in a well-organized fashion in my wife's wedding dress box. We're planning to revisit them on our 50th wedding anniversary, or even sooner. How much of their content will we share will remain a secret.
Throughout my years on active duty and as a naval reservist, I have served in many different commands and on several ships. One in particular command, Mobile Inshore Undersea Warfare Unit 203, was quite demanding and challenging. And it was all work and no play. It was hump work and all hands evolution. No matter what rank you were, officer or enlisted, you pitched in and helped, setting up 40-man tents, sleeping out in sub-freezing temperatures, eating MREs, and standing demanding watches in some dangerous places. In July of 1996, I received orders to do my annual training with my reserve unit, MIUW 203. My orders were to report to Savannah, Georgia to do security for the sailing events for the 1996 Olympics. I figured this was going to be a good deal, and I was going to see some good events and probably stay in a first-class hotel. But to my surprise, when several shipmates and I arrived at the Savannah airport, we were picked up by a van from another MIW unit and shuttled to Tybee Island, Georgia, where we reported to Commanding Officer, MIUW, Charleston, South Carolina. We were quartered in a schoolhouse with the deal of doing maintenance for our stay there. We set up our cots and our 782 gear, backpack, canteen, poncho, ammo pouch, flashlight, sea bags, and an empty classroom. We were briefed by the commanding officer on what our duties would be and issued special IDs for security clearance. We would be standing watches on a habitat for wildlife in the middle of the Savannah River. That evening at 1800 hours, we packed our gear and went out to relieve the watch. Several members and myself from our unit were shuttled down to the marina in Tybee Island, where we boarded a high-speed swift boat operated by members of the U.S. Navy SBU, Special Boat Unit. The boat ride on the river was quite exciting. We weaved from bank to bank on the river at a high rate of speed. It reminded me of my days on assault craft when we were making beach landings with the Marines. We arrived at a destination where we disembarked onto a platform in the middle of the river where the boats were moored. We then boarded a Zodiac and headed for the beach on the habitat. We hit the beach with our gear. We felt like we were going into battle. Our command post was situated on a hill with radar and sonar equipment. We trudged up the hill to our command post, met with the others who were on watch, and introduced ourselves. We laid out our sleeping bags and got some sleep before the oncoming watch. I had the mid-watch with Petty Officer Smith along the banks of the Savannah River. We monitored incoming Marine traffic with special night vision equipment. Nothing unusual happened. We were relieved in the morning and had a chow of MREs. They were our meals for the next 3 days on the habitat. That morning is when I met Petty Officer Duncan from the South Carolina unit. He was knowledgeable about the environment. Around his neck was a rattlesnake fang attached to his dog tag chain. He warned us about the rattlesnakes and alligators and told us to shake out our sleeping bags. I immediately ringed a hammock and slept with my machete for the next 3 days. The next day, after our watch, we asked Petty Officer Duncan if he would accompany some of us on a patrol around the habitat. While exploring, we noticed a lot of signs put up by Greenpeace warning us not to harm the wildlife. We came upon this open pond in the middle of the habitat. I asked Duncan what those little dots that were sticking out of the water were. He replied, gators. I asked him if we could snag one. Knowing that we were city boys, he was more than glad to show us his skills. He knew it was a baby gator, so he stealthily snuck up on it, baited it with small pieces of bread. He snagged it by the head, and I grabbed it by the tail, and we posed while my buddies took a photo. Then out of the water came Mama, about a 12-foot alligator. We chucked baby gator back into the water and ran like hell, while Duncan was laughing all the way. We remained on the habitat for a few more days, standing our watches, eating MREs and living like grunts. Always being aware of the critters we were surrounded by. As long as Duncan was there, there was no fear. After our 3 days watch, SBU picked us up and shuttled us back to Tybee Island. We returned to the schoolhouse and rigged up a shower with a hose attached to a spigot. Believe me, a shower never felt so good after 3 days in the bush. On July 27th, we were informed of the bombing in Atlanta. Law enforcement authorities thought we might be a potential target. The city of Tybee Island, fearing the worst, contracted 50 school buses and surrounded the school, and our CO gave us a direct order to remain on the premises and be vigilant. Since our unit didn't carry any weapons, we stood our security watches with rubber M16s. After a few days, things calmed down and we were given a little R&R in Tybee Island. At the end of our 2 weeks annual training, we returned to the habitat and packed up and staged all of our equipment, and the mighty Chinook helicopters hauled it away. The guys from the South Carolina unit decided to have a farewell party. They held an old-fashioned pig roast for us, and these guys really knew how to do a barbecue. We all said our goodbyes knowing that we had accomplished our mission. If there was one thing I learned after spending a year in MIUW, I was not cut out to be a grunt. I eventually transferred back to a shipboard unit, but I always have a special place in my heart for those grunts.
A shout came from the back hallway. Ethan kicked me. Mom, Ethan kicked me just now. Quieter. Did not. Elizabeth hollers back even louder. Did too, and he should get in trouble. Kristen. Should he get in trouble because you say so, or should you get in trouble for tattling? Knowing that this is just an opening salvo in the latest skirmish between two siblings and will only escalate if the two parties are not separated, I struggle out of my post-morning activities, nap-driven fog, discerning the easiest path to break this cycle of aggression is to go and do something with Ethan. I struggle to think of options and get the energy to get out of the seat. Going through my head is this what I want the rest of the day to be? Or I can get Ethan out of the house to do something. Thinking. Where would I go? What will get him out and about? And then the idea launches and strikes as lightning out of the sky. Come on, let's go for a walk. I look at the dog. Disney, do you want to come with? This is punctuated by his quickly scurrying under the chair and looking back at me with his nose pressed down to the ground, his puppy eyes telling me, not this time, no way, not going anywhere with you. So I swivel my head and shout out the other directions needed to get this mission started. Come on, Ethan, let's get our shoes on and head out. We move to the front hall, find our shoes, and begin the preparations to head outside. Quick check, head to toe, and my shoes are on, hat is on my head, and ready to go. Uncle Rob, can you tie my shoes? A burp. Pause. Not going to move across the line of departure because all the equipment's not good to go. Like I would look at a soldier preparing to move out on patrol without their ruck and weapon, I peer down at Ethan with a "did you just ask that" look pasted across my face, which he must not see because Ethan asked a second time, Uncle Rob, can you tie my shoes? I look at him again, thinking, right size to be in school, made it through a few grades of elementary school. He's not really asking me to tie his shoe. This has to be a joke. trying to see if I'll do it. Of course he can tie his shoe. Then there's the effort it takes to get down, bend over to tie them. I already bent over and tied mine with creaks and cracks. I really do not want to do it again for his. A deep breath, focusing on getting this done as a pre-hike check, and not turning it into something I wish would just fix itself, I lean over and tie them both, and we head out the door and down the stairs. Where are we going? Adventure. Not really sure. We're heading out on an adventure. Because I don't really know where we're going. We have options: a small lake with falls across the street, a trail that goes through the marshland to a small peninsula into the Hudson River behind the house, and then there's the easiest, most clean option: just walk to the bottom of the street and the Hudson River view there. Only option out of the mix is even shorter, down to the next side street and back. Since the dog didn't come, that probably is off the table. So I take another deep breath and we look to walk further than to the corner and back. It really is a toss-up until we get to the corner. There's a trail over by the end of the road behind the house I'd been meaning to check out, but I've not walked it yet. You can see the almost island pushing into the river from our back deck. It'd be fun to head out there, but it may be muddy, and I don't know how well the trail is cleared. So I'm still a bit undecided until I hear a train going by at the bottom of the hill, down the street from our house. 73 freight trains a day make that trip. We're heading down the street to see what is there. Why do that? Don't you want to see if we can get there and see the train? You can hear it now. It's just below us, running between the river and the hill. I guess. Could be an adventure. There's a sewage plant that last year had a fire when they were doing some work. Haven't seen that for a while. Then there's a river, the glorious Hudson River, and also a pretty cool stream runs along the side of the road and empties into the river under the train tracks. Thinking to myself, now this will be an adventure. Ethan shouts, "Woohoo! An adventure!" and he kicks up his heels and we start to head down the street. Now, our neighborhood is off an old state road, and it has some historic buildings on it from the old J.P. Morgan estate. And there are several houses that are having work done, so that there's construction equipment and paving equipment out and about. We're up at the top of the hill, and the street runs downhill from our house all the way to the river, with a few branches that dead end before you hit the sanitation plant, railroad tracks, and river. Plenty to see just walking down the street, people out on their porches, dogs barking at windows, stuff in yards. As we start heading down the road, there's a stick on the side, and Ethan grabs it up. I got a machete, ready to cut through and get on our adventure. He kicks up his feet again and starts swinging at the lower branches as we continue down the road. We get to the old laundry building that's now a house, and he really has no interest. Same when we go by the next old building that was part of the estate. We get to the first road off to the left and a small bridge that goes over a creek. Where's that go? You know, I already told you. Down where we're going, to the Hudson River. Ethan works his way over the fence, and that is between the road and the creek. Looks at the water pushing its way downstream through the rocks and fallen branches. Do you know why I have the fence up, E? No, why? To protect us from the troll. Your machete's not big enough if he comes out to get us, but he's too short to get over the fence. No way. Yes way. You have a nice bridge like this, running water, garbage cans nearby. Perfect place for a troll to set up. He just waits for unsuspecting people to cross over, reaches up, and grabs them for a quick snack. Don't worry, though. The fence will keep him away. Works just like they do at the exhibits at the zoo. Sure, Uncle Rob, is what he says as he backs away from the fence towards the middle of the street, and we keep heading on our way. Another twist and turn, and the stream grows closer to the road. Ethan looks at me, looks at the rocks, leading down to the trees to the water, and he starts staring at the glittering promise. Before I can utter a single word of confirmation or denial, it's an adventure, and he's down among the rocks, looking for a way to get through. I keep walking, just go a ways down. There he is still. I can see him hopping from stone to stone, looking for fish and frogs and big bugs, while still on the lookout so he doesn't become a tasty troll snack. My mind rolling over how this keeps us out of the house a while longer. Hope he stays clean, doesn't fall in, and looks like there's nothing to worry too much about from what I can see there. It's like I have my own adventure show, looking through the leaves and listening to Ethan's narrative about what he's whacked, cut, and hopped about. This show, however, doesn't cut to commercial. It takes Ethan out of my view. So with a sigh, I walk back to where the creek edged up the road, and I make my way down into the rocks and the trailing waters that are rushing down to the Hudson River. This takes effort. I think, why am I out here? Why I'm not sitting down in the house, slowly losing focus as my book falls out of my hand and I'm lulled into an afternoon nap. Each sideways step a creak and an ache, the beginning of the murmurs in the back of my head to get back up to the road. Keep your feet dry. Why are you heading down into a creek bed? Up ahead of me, just glancing back and seeing that I've joined him, "Uncle Rob, it's an adventure!" exclaims Ethan with glee as he swings his stick through the tall grasses and at the branches that hang over the water. The swish of his stick brightening the gleam in his eye and lengthening the smile and joy of his speech as he hops off to the next rock and the next, pushing us past the point where I could see him from before. Well beyond my expectations and plans for our walk, we'd blossomed into an adventure. Pulled off the road and into the creek by Ethan's enthusiasm, I still feel that niggling to get back up to the road, keep our, or at least my, feet dry. Ethan shouts back to me, "No more rocks, Uncle Rob. Feet are going to get wet." With a certainty of step and a splash, he continues to move downstream, now walking in the stream. That step, made without hesitation for him, breaks me past worrying about staying clean and dry, as the rocks run out for me and there's now less of a chance of my slipping in or twisting an ankle as I try to fit my feet onto a dry patch. And my feet are both now in the creek as well, water rising up over my ankles with a sense of cool freedom and adventure. We keep moving down the creek, climbing over fallen trees, going under fallen trees, and pushing past rock falls into the crevices where the creek's been working its way down, till we get to the point where we can no longer head through the brush and the rocks. Well, Ethan may be able to keep going, but it does not look like there's any way I'm going to fit and end up on the side of the creek where the road is. So we backtrack a bit and head up over to the top to reach a sanitation plant and our last stretch to the railroad tracks and the Hudson River. Climbing up the rocks over a pile of used timbers from track repairs, we get to a mountain of tarred timbers aside a pile of steel plates and rusted railroad spikes. A sense of purpose for our journey, treasure we had come here to gather up. Ethan wants to climb up the railroad ties just as we scamper down the creek, but I hold him back. The creek, water, and mud, all that is so much more forgiving than tar and splinters or rolling timbers. Inner safety officer waves us off from clamoring about those piles as we slosh down the creek. We move over to the rustling iron piles. "CE, we've got spikes. One each for the pile for each of us since we made it." And I pick them up and go to hand him one, the rust scaling off and turning my head a soft reddish brown. "Dirty. Don't want one. You take them." And I do as we turn around and look where the creek comes out of the crack in the rocks on the hillside and dwells in a pool before crossing under the railroad tracks and into the Hudson River. Let's head back. We can get a snack when we're home and share about our walk down to the creek. A walk that almost didn't happen, which, if Ethan had been just a little slower or not pushed as far down the creek before I got there, would not have happened, and we would have missed out on that adventure together. Since I came back, there are a lot of times I pause instead of engaging and have missed out on doing stuff and going places. Sometimes I don't have the energy or the desire. We turn towards the road and walk all the way back up the hill, taking off our shoes and socks to dry over the railings on the front porch and go into the house to share about the frogs and the fish we'd seen as we made the commitment to walk down the creek to the river. Reflecting on our walk, I come to realize it was fun, that the step off the road into the creek took me past what I wanted to be doing, shook me out of the after-church doldrums, where I'm full from lunch and looking to close my eyes and check the lids for leaks. It was an activity that started simply to provide something for Ethan to be doing that pushed me past being an observer to becoming an active participant in the adventure. Got me past looking through the leaves, past just getting to the edge and walking on the dry stones, to full commitment, both feet in the water, heading downstream. It was a good adventure. A few days later, as I was driving with my wife, while she was driving and I was along for the ride, I was thinking about the walk with Ethan and how it got me to get past just watching, being on the side, to be engaged in walking in the creek. Maybe it was his smile and joy moving off the road. It could have been because I was concerned and was trying to keep up to be sure that he stayed safe. Might have been that I just wanted to lose the years and get back to doing something fun and youthful. I shared this with her, that I didn't know why, but that I was glad we did it. Waiting, expecting to hear maybe we shouldn't have walked in the creek, or that I should have checked with his mom first before committing to something that would get us both wet and dirty. She paused a bit before answering and then said, "I wish you would decide to do things with me." More than the first step into the cold water that hit, more than the slide off a slippery rock, I felt it move me in the feels. A little bit farther, and the growth that was spent on an afternoon adventure made me reflect on the other times I've let life and family pass by, content to simply sit and look through the leaves, and didn't walk down to track through with them where they or my wife were heading. With a deep breath and a desire to lock onto the motivation that got me off the road, the thought whispered through my head, I would like to. And I continued to reflect how I can be more engaged as we drove down the highway now in silence.
I heard the shuffling before I saw him. The door stood as a barrier, and I waited patiently for it to open after I knocked. Time seemed to stand still as I shifted my nursing bag from one shoulder to the other. I shivered slightly as a chill from the autumn air had followed me into the apartment building. I watched the door slowly open, and I made an audible sigh of relief as I faced a man 5'6", graying hair with sallow skin tone, now standing in front of me. Impatiently, I was thinking, let's get on with this. I have other patients to see. Visiting nurse, I said, noticing a pleasant, comforting aroma embracing me as I walked in. Flowers scented the room and greeted me from the dining room table. Modest furnishings and decorations all had their place in this pristine apartment. Yes, come in, nurse, this way. He waved his right arm. His left arm hung slightly uneven from the shoulder and seemed to sway. I detected a slight accent when he spoke. After closing the door behind me, he started to make his way towards the living room. I now knew the origin of the shuffle as my eyes followed his path to the chair. Watching him walk, he seemed a bit uneven, but with the left side dragging slightly behind, he maintained his balance. He had a gray long-sleeve shirt tucked neatly into his black pants. I could have seen myself reflected in his polished black shoes. Lines engraved on his face told a story of hardships, but his blue eyes sparkled as they bore into me with precision and intensity. Please, have a seat. His voice was a quiet whisper as he extended his arm, indicating where he wanted me to sit. Through the soft tone came a confidence that projected a powerful presence. He may have been debilitated at this time, but he certainly wasn't weak. My wife, Rebecca, he nodded, turning towards the woman sitting on the sofa, smiling with acknowledgement. Hello, I said. Lovely flowers. Her smile gleamed like a brightly shining sun as she shook her head in appreciation. I informed Jake of my purpose, an initial evaluation to qualify him for home care so he could receive physical therapy to help improve any mobility and function that was lost as a result of his recent stroke. He agreed, answering all my questions clearly, precisely, and as quickly as I asked them. I got the impression he was a no-nonsense kind of guy. Jake had retired from the clothing business. His face shone with pride as he spoke haltingly in what I recognized as a German accent. He and Rebecca loved spending time with their children and grandchildren who lived in the surrounding communities. Besides his family, working with a small balcony garden and walking in the neighborhood with his wife were his greatest pleasures. His goal was to get back to those activities now interrupted by his recent stroke. When I got to the time of the visit to monitor his blood pressure, he reached over with deliberate grace and slowly unbuttoned the shirt sleeve on his left arm. I wanted to grab his arm to help him, but impatiently I watched as he focused on the undertaking, fumbling with the task, but still exuding a regal dignity. When he raised the sleeve for me to check his blood pressure, he didn't make any noticeable change in his expression, but I did. I gasped, and then fought to disguise it as a cough. My eyes fixed on the blurred numbers tattooed on his left lower arm. Searching my memory, I recalled enough history to know that the Holocaust concentration camp prisoners received tattoos at Auschwitz. I felt a cold chill shuddering through my body. I tried not to stare as I wrapped the blood pressure cuff around the upper arm. I didn't say anything. When I was finished, he slowly unrolled his sleeve and buttoned the shirt at the wrist. After I concluded my questions and examinations, he said, "Cup of tea, nurse?" I had other patients to see that day. I thought back to the beginning of the visit when I impatiently wanted to hurry the interview along. Quickly reevaluating my plan for the day, I felt the urge to remain in the company of Jake and Rebecca. "Milk and sugar," I responded, as I left my bag on the coffee table and walked to the dining room where Rebecca had already started putting out the teacups. I watched how Jake silently and quietly looked fondly at Rebecca as she poured his tea. He commented on the delicious biscuits and touched her hand affectionately, thanking her for her efforts. She responded with a demure smile, her eyes meeting his as if they were new lovers. The room came alive with their reverence of simple pleasures. I couldn't imagine that there was anything at this point in his life that scared him. After all, once you coexist with death, living becomes icing on the cake. I think his dreams at night became his humble reality during the day. Get back to his garden, take in the scent of flowers, and enjoy a cup of tea. I savored the moment, hoping some of it would rub off on me. As we sat enjoying each other's company, sipping tea, I felt a sense of gratitude wash over me like an ocean wave. I wondered, couldn't we all benefit from sharing moments with people who haven't forgotten the value of life and don't take it for granted?
This past summer, August, I drove across America, west coast to east, with my 28-year-old daughter, Adrian, in her yellow Ford Ranger two-seater pickup. We call it Tweety because it's yellow. It was my first time traversing America on tierra firma. She was moving from California after 6+ years back to New York. Our family of 3 daughters had grown up, first in Lower Manhattan, Broadway and 12th Street, and then in my brownstone in Brooklyn, Carroll Gardens. So my kids are true New Yorkers. She was leaving California because, in her words, the foggy weather of Berkeley is annoying, and I prefer the people of Brooklyn. I flew to California to get us started. This also gave me the opportunity to meet someone I knew in Vietnam and not seen since our 105mm artillery battery was under attack by a small band of NVA on a pitch-black night, September 7th, 1968. We had moved the firebase onto a lower western Central Highlands on a low hilltop, this remote area called Quang Duc Province. I was hurt that night, but thought it was not near as bad. It turned out to be much worse. Other guys really got it, about 19 odd casualties. I sat against my sandbag bunker at daybreak, writing up a list of them on a yellow pad of paper, which I have kept to this day. Why I had the presence of mind to do that, I don't know, but I wasn't able to move much, and so watched the chaos and the partial destruction that occurred at our firebase, evidenced as the early morning darkness drifted away. 3 of ours dead, 2 near me. It could have been more. 3 or more NVA dead, but I only was able to see 2 nearby. They came in not so much to kill us, which would have been expected, but to destroy the 5 howitzers, to put them out of commission. They carried explosives and satchel charges strapped to their bare chests and some RPGs. Our 5 guns, yes, we call them guns, were largely intact that I could see. Our fire missions must have been having some serious impact, probably onto the Ho Chi Minh trails. We never got any detailed feedback from the Forward Observer Command. I was in the Fire Direction Control Connex when it got hit around 4 a.m. by an RPG. It knocked me unconscious. Months earlier, in November and December of '67, just before the Tet Offensive, I was positioned on one of the guns. One of the mates on the gun crew was a strong, fair-haired Midwestern guy, Don C. His image could have been a kid right out of the cornfields of Idaho or Iowa. Don was the first to be medevaced out in the breaking light. I heard he had his leg blown off below the knee. It's the first time I've written that way that morning. It took me half an hour to find Don on Facebook these days. We became friends. For a few years, we exchanged thoughts, feelings, Republican stuff, yes, we both are, but I never asked about his leg out of courtesy. He has lived in San Jose since after the Army hospitals. He spent some years in hospitals, having scores of surgeries and recoveries. By the time I got to Don's house in San Jose that night, it was near 10 p.m. Flight delay, car rental delay, 3 hours time zone difference. I was bushed, but he graciously took me in and we talked till 1 a.m. till I couldn't keep my head up. Mary, his wife of all those years, made espresso-like coffee in the morning, exactly to my liking, and now I was happy. We spoke of many guys we remembered and their personality traits and quirks. A few hours kicking back on the couch and Don in the recliner, I got up the courage to ask about his leg. He didn't seem to mind. It didn't seem to have a prosthetic that I could discern. And without hesitation, he yanked up his left pant leg to show me. There really wasn't a knee per se and a lot of deformity, but there was a leg, very thin, muscle twisted looking and intact. And he had been walking around the house. How was this possible? I told him what I had written that morning in September 68. He said they shot him full of morphine right off and he recalls nothing. The bone was broken through, sticking out, and the leg apparently remained attached only by skin and bits of extended muscle, dangling. So the medics bent it around and tied it up against his upper thigh to secure it and save it. He commented to me that he was very lucky. So many with serious injuries say this. Lucky, he says, because the hospital in Japan had few major casualties that week, and the Army doctors had extra time to spend beginning reconstruction on his leg with metal components inside and grafting. There were scores of surgeries, many back in California. We spent the day. I brought out a folder full of my pictures. By evening, I had to connect with my daughter Adrian up in Berkeley and begin our journey back across America. I hadn't expected Don's close friendship. It was a surprise. We were only acquaintances in the fields of Vietnam. I am grateful. His survival, and with jaw cancer now, a few years back, he is a force to be impressed with. Had it not been for his injuries, I would likely not have this friendship. I will visit him whenever I can, and have made it my goal to do so. In this December 67 picture, I'm in the white t-shirt. Don is the blonde guy, second from the right. That's the end.